into the past because the context of time and place.
I noticed changes. I did my national service in Germany, and they seem to have a better
I
standard.
don't ever remember being frightened until they had a thing called a doodle.
And somebody grabbed the back of my neck and yanked me out, and it was one of the masters.
I said, I haven't heard a word out of you. No, we're talking on the phone.
Going back pre-pandemic was, we would never have thought about ordering food and drink through an app.
RAF was really influential, really critical in the Second World War. I mean, taking it back to 1940, the Battle of Britain.
Provision has to be made for the protection of persons and property in the event of hostile air attack. This is a new section of national defence and is purely civilian. As a munitions centre, Birmingham is a special area, and there is every likelihood that if war broke out, it would be one of the first parts of the country to be attacked.
From air raid sirens to Wi-Fi signals, Birmingham, once scared by bombs, now hums with innovation, community, and quiet strength. This is more than a story of survival. This is the story of how a city didn't just survive, it transformed. During World War II, Steelhouse Lane Police Station was vital in enforcing blackout rules, curfews, and handling civil unrest during the Birmingham Blitz. It remained operational throughout the war, supporting emergency response and internal security efforts. To understand where Birmingham is going, we need to know where it's been, and few know it better than Carl Chin, historian, born and bred Birmingham, and champion of the city's untold stories. To learn more about the impact of World War II and what happened to Birmingham's infrastructure and communities.
How did major events like World War I and II impacted the way people connected with each other in Birmingham and beyond?
That's a really good question. It's a big question. I've got two young granddaughters, and when I take them to school, I always say to the little ones, give me your Donny. And people wonder, where does that word come from? Older brothers like me, I'm 68.
Yeah.
From my background, say Donny for hand. And I think it comes from the First World War. Now, I may be wrong on this, but so many men were fighting on the Western Front in France. And the French words for give me your hand are Donny le man. Give me your hands, Donny le man. Yeah. So that's just one example of how cultures can interact with each other. We saw a massive change in the First World War from horse transport and communications to motorised transport and communications. We saw another change from pigeons sending messages much more to telegrams. Telegrams were also there before, but there's this overlap, with messages being sent by animals, but also by technology as it improves. That then I think really expands in the Second World War. And I think where we can see the importance of communication, particularly for a big city like Birmingham, is during the Blitz. So to ensure that big cities like Birmingham, which were going to be targeted by the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, because of our industries, to find out when they were going to attack, there was a complex system of communications. So you would have spotters on the south coast who would relay back their messages to another point, and eventually go to a central operations room. And then it would be sending out alerts to the East End of London, to South London, to Birmingham, to Manchester. So this was, and then you had the connections within the city. You had to find out from the central meeting room where all the information was coming in, that had to be sent out to the neighbourhoods. Now, often, because of the bombing, the communications broke down. So there were messenger boys. So you have to still rely on older forms of passing on information. But there is this real move towards technology. We can also see it in the Enigma code, the breaking down of the German intelligence, which was in codes, encrypted, so that the British couldn't find out what it was. That was found out by people at Bletchley. So we need to understand that technology became part of industrialized warfare, unhappily. It still is. And it's become even more technological. Let's look at drones now in the war in Ukraine, which is going to change the whole approach to warfare. So technology is a double-edged sword, isn't it? It can be a real force for good, but it can also be a terrible force for evil.
From Carlton's information, we see the impact of World War II on communities. To help us understand what role pubs played in communities, we will see the manager of Greenman Pub in Harborne, Matt, who will take us on a journey. During the war, when the nights were long and the world uncertain, the local pub became more than a place to drink, it became a lifeline.
So a pub is a special place anyway. It's the heart of the community. People travel quite far to go to a particular place. It's where people, a lot of lonely people meet each other. But it's been part of the community for lots of years. But the reason why the Green Man's special is because we're part of the Harborne community, and it's where people meet each other for that drink. We have special clubs going on here as well, so it brings all types of people together.
So, what do you say the role of pub has it changed over the time?
It has. I've only been here for a snippet, but been in pubs for the last 14 years myself. It has changed with obviously technology changing as well. It has changed with when I first started, there was newspaper stands in the pub. Not many pubs have them no more. So that's sort of how technology has moved on. But it has changed quite considerably, especially with the pandemic, sort of going back to 4 or 5 years ago. So pubs have changed quite a lot, but they are still the heart of the community. We still have, as I said, clubs and people still meet here as a good meeting place to start. So it definitely has changed, but still being the heart of the community is important.
Do you know any stories from that period, or would you have any ideas or anything that you might have heard of?
Yeah, so I'll say before my time, but yeah, the pub was open just before the war. So I've heard many stories, old wives' tales I've heard. So I'm not sure what's true or not, but yeah, soldiers used to meet here, families used to meet here before, during, and after the war. Because it's such an important time of history. People used to come here for news. There wasn't emails or text messages back then, obviously. So yeah, people didn't know what was going on. They came together as a community, and the pub was the heart.
It is very evident how the community used pubs to interact, share information in the old days. For Malcolm and Mavis, Birmingham was never just a city. It was where they fell in love. Their story reminds us that behind every bombed-out street was a kitchen table, a shared meal, a moment of joy that refused to be taken. Now we will ask Malcolm and Mavis their personal experience growing up after the war.
In 1943, we had a 2 up and 2 down, right? when I was 3, we had to move because my brother became 7. And in those days, a man or a boy child couldn't be with girl children in the same bedroom. And so there wasn't room for another bedroom. So we were very fortunate to get a 3-bedroomed council house. Just after the war, they built all these houses. And it was the first time that they ever had a bathroom. And before that, you had to go to the swimming baths because they had a room off at the swimming baths for you to go and have your bathroom. There was no other way. Right. Or you had a tin bath, what you call a big long tin, and you used to have to fill it with water, and that's how you, in front of the fire, and you had your bath that way. That was it. That was the only way. So when we actually got there, it was got a bath in a bathroom. No, nothing else. It was just the bath. And we used to have the fires on, and the fires used to heat the little tank that was there to make your bath. That was really lovely, and it was luxury. Regarding childhood, it was very different to what it is today, because they didn't have any equipment like you have today, like you're using now, for instance. So we had a ball, a bat, and we used to play rounders in the park up the road with all our mates who lived there, because there was lots of children, and we all used to go up to the park and play.
The children were left a lot to their own devices, and we used to make up our own games. So, and the game that Mavis is referring to was called Skimmers. And what you used to do, you used to get the old cigarette packets, which you took the insides out after the cigarettes had all gone, and then you'd fold them down, and then you would skim them up against the wall. So when you were going home from school, you would be sort of kneeling in the gutter and skimming these cigarette packets up against the wall across the pavement, and whoever got their cigarette packet closest to the wall, they won all the cigarette packets. And cigarette packets for small children came quite valuable. So we never actually ever walked past a litter bin or anything without tipping it out and getting all the cigarette packets out. So that was one of the games. But yes. And marbles was another one. You'd be walking home from school, and it'd take you an hour to get home from school because you were all kneeling in the gutter playing with your marbles.
Yeah. And if you had a dolly, which you didn't have a lot of, you only had one dot, you shared a pram between you, a doll's pram. Like the lady's child up the road would have a pram because they bought her a pram for Christmas for the dolls. And we all used to stick our dolls in the pram and take them a walk like a baby.
We had hobbies like train spotting and bus spotting. We would spend hours and hours and hours at the bus station at the King's Head, getting all the numbers of the buses and you'd go down to the Midland Red bus garage. There was a huge bus garage in Burwood High Street, massive bus garage, and we go down there and go into the into the office, and they would give you a fleet list, a booklet, and so you would be down at the bus station, and you'd be ticking off your buses, and and then on Saturdays, most Saturdays, you had to be down at New Street Station. Because we were train spotted. You got the numbers, and And at 1 o'clock, you had to be in New Street Station at 1 o'clock because the Devonian came in. And this was the express coming up from Plymouth and Leicester, so you'd got to be there to see what was pulling it. Because, you know, there would probably be a namer on it, you know, so, you know, you'd be sitting there, you know, and if Mallard came in, like, you know, you were in ecstasy for weeks, you know. So, you know, and then when we got older, senior schools, you know, we had our bicycles, you know, everybody had a bicycle, you know. I mean...
We did.
No, well, at our school, at Arbon Hill, everybody had a bicycle. I mean, there was massive bicycle sheds at Arbon Hill, and we would be going off on our bikes all over the place. You know, there'd be cycle runs in the evening, and most Sundays, you know, you'd be off to Kinver or Bridgenorth or somewhere. You know, there was a cycle club which we sort of formed ourselves within the school, and so off we used to go. So even right through to senior school, a lot of our entertainment or amusements for ourselves was almost, you could say, self-generated. You know, because there was no structure within the school for a cycling club or anything like that. So it was just we got together, and then so people would say, "Oh, that's a good idea. Can I come?" I'd say, "Yeah, of course you can." And you know, so it all built up like that. Even junior schools maybe, but less so in the junior schools. But in the infant schools, I mean, it was an absolute taboo for anybody, for a parent to turn up at the school to collect you. I mean, you would die of shame if that were to happen. And you would never speak to your mother or your father for weeks.
You would not.
You know, because when the school turned out, if we go to the senior school, for example, when the school turned out at Harborne Hill, there would be a massive children either walking up the hill to, and the catchment area was the Harborne area.
Yeah, it was.
So all your classmates, if you like, lived very, very close to where you are. So there was a huge social side to the school, apart from the educational side. Particularly in the summer months, you'd go home and have your tea, and then you'd be out. You know, you'd have made arrangements to meet up with some other friends, and so you'd go off on your bicycle or whatever. If you'd said to the children, if a teacher at the school had said, right, we've done this. Now I want you to do this or write this up or read this or something at home. You know, there was just no concept of giving homework from school, and if they had, you wouldn't have done it. You know, because you've got other things to do. You know, like important things like go and stand on street corners and chat with your friends. You know. Or maybe you were going to the Royalty or the Flea Pit, you know, in Arbon. I remember one time I walked into the dining room, and a friend of mine was standing. There was always a big queue, and a friend of mine was standing towards the front of the queue, and he waved me over. I said, "Oh, all right." He said, "Yes, just come over." So I went over. I stood there, and I'd been talking for about 30 seconds, and somebody grabbed the back of my neck and yanked me out, and it was one of the masters, and he gave me a rollicking for pushing in the queue, sent me to his stock room, and I stood there for about an hour, and then he came and gave me three strokes across the backside with his gym pump. So needless to say, for the rest of my school days, I always made sure I went to the back of the queue.
Chatting to the lovely couple made me understand how simple life was back then, nowadays where technology has massively taken over. To understand how it was during the World War II, now we'll move to another couple who have lived through the war and ask them how and what was their experience. For Pat and Gordon, the war lives on, not in history books, but in flashes of light, smells of smoke, and the sound of footsteps running for shelter.
The thing I can particularly remember was walking down the high street after there'd been a raid and there'd been a landmine had been dropped and people's clothes were up in the trees. And they had a thing called a doodle bomb, which was right at the end of the war, and that was quite frightening because if you could hear it and then suddenly you couldn't hear it, it meant it was top of you when you'd had it. So that was a very scary thing. But almost immediately the war ended. They bombed the factories where they were making them, and that was the end.
The first thing I remember hearing war declared, I was with my grandparents, and they suddenly went very silent, turned the radio on, went very silent, and I heard Neville Chamberlain telling us that we were at war, and they were very solemn and very serious, because it was only 20 years since the previous war.
I particularly remember the night that Coventry was bombed, because that was an all-nighter. We used to go down in the cellar in my mother's house, and we'd all got a bed there, and we put curtains on the walls to make it comfortable.
We were rationed, of course, but we had an allotment, and we were able to grow a lot of our own food. My father, my stepfather, was quite strict about black market or anything like that, so we didn't get any perks particularly.
So how was like being in the national service, and what kind of experience was it for you?
Well, I'd been a student, and in '54 I was called up and went to cataract training as a radio mechanic. I got off the train at Catterick to be greeted by very loud voices telling us what to do and where to go, and calling us all sorts of names. And it stayed like that during training. You know, the basic training and the trade training. But at that time, it was very strict. You had to have all your buttons polished and all your brass polished, shoes shining so that you could see your face in them. And then when I went abroad, it was more, we were doing a job then, repairing radios and electrical work. And it made more sense. But it was hard going doing the training.
Well, the RAF was really influential, really critical in the Second World War. I mean, taking it back to 1940, the Battle of Britain, when the German Luftwaffe were looking to gain air superiority in the skies over Britain, which would have been one of the prerequisites for them launching a land invasion. Because that was repelled, that meant that land invasion never took place. Britain was able to continue as a combatant in the war, drawing on support from across the empire to take the fight to the Germans. So once that position was secured, with that defensive role in the Battle of Britain, then the RAF took on more of an offensive capability, taking the fight to the Germans through the Allied bomber campaign, starting off with daylight raids, which were relatively unsuccessful, then moving towards night raids, and the scale just increasing month by month until second half of the war, you know, occasionally mounting so-called 1,000 bomber raids. Yep. So really taking the fight to the heart of the enemy. Meanwhile, at sea, with the threat of German U-boats looking to cut off those vital sea lanes, bringing supplies into Britain, the RAF were really important in helping the Navy through flying patrols, and again, in some cases, taking the fight to the U-boats themselves with bombs and depth charges, and making sure that the UK remained supplied with the goods that it needed to keep its population fed, and to continue the war.
The British then Air Force, the RAF, attacking Germany, that depends upon technology, the communications that find out where something has to go from. Let's say the French resistance. Somebody in the French resistance group has got a radio. They have to then relay back to London, this is where you need to attack this railway line, or whatever it may be. And then from there, it goes to the squadron.
Yeah.
And the squadron then goes out but they're in communications all the time with their base. So we see a real advance in the importance of technological communications in the Second World War.
From the couple's story, we understand how hard it was to grow up in that age and what kinds of challenges were there. Tom gives us an overview that what kind of challenges were faced by RAF. In today's Birmingham, the networks have changed, but the purpose hasn't. Connection. From Zoom calls to smart homes, the tools are different, but the goal's the same. To bring people together, to make life a bit easier, a bit fairer. How has the advent of Wi-Fi and digital technology changed daily life in Birmingham?
I suppose the internet. I suppose the internet has, as you know, everything else is important. I remember our first telephone, and older people like me will also remember, you had a telephone in the house. It was always at the bottom of the stairs in the hall, and you sat on the bottom steps of the stairs to speak to people. I'm married to an Irish woman, my wife Kay, and we did our courting, as we used to call it in them days, on the phone. She's from Dublin, I'm from Birmingham, but there was no mobile phones, so it was letters. We wrote a lot of letters to each other, and when we first married, I remember my wife saying to me she was really missing her mum and dad in Dublin and her brothers and sister, and she said, wouldn't it be great if one day when we found somebody we could see them? So me being a typical sceptical Englishman, guess what I said, lads? That will never happen.
So the big thing changed, again, going back pre-pandemic, was we would never have thought about ordering food and drink through an app. So just in the last 5 years, that's changed dramatically. And you go back previous 50 years before that, you wouldn't have TVs in a pub, you wouldn't have phones. So as technology has moved on, yeah, it certainly has changed where you see a group of younger people scrolling on their phone, and then a group of probably older people sitting there and having a good old natter.
There are no exact lessons of the past because the context of time and place changes. So Britain in 2025 is not the same place as it was in 1825 or 1925, but there are still lots of connections there. We are still an island. We still have big cities. We still have poverty. We still have prejudice. So there are lots of things from the past that may not be exact lessons, but they are guides.
Getting back to your point, how is it different today? I mean, you know, apart from the mobile phone, I wouldn't have thought it was a lot different.
We had it all on the board, right. End of, and you copied it off the board into your books, and you had a desk, a proper desk, where you could leave your books. Like an individual. It was a form. Yeah. You had a form school. You know, a form in your school, and that was your form teacher. But you had a desk each and an inkwell.
There was never less than 40 in the class. No. But the teacher was standing there, and it didn't matter how many pupils were there, because he was doing the teaching. He had his board where he'd do his notes and write and doing the arithmetic and all the rest of it. And we were all sitting there looking at him and learning the same things together. So whether it was 30, 20, 30, 40, 50, didn't matter.
I was doing something outside, and these three lads, they always come down. And I said, excuse me, and they looked up. I said, don't you talk to each other? And he said, we are talking. I said, I haven't heard a word out of you. No, we're talking on the phone. I said, to each other. And they said, yes.
We will never understand that. No, we don't. Because we just don't understand the technology.
I think there is a and worry that it is making us less connected. You see young people and also older people now in a group. They're not talking to each other. They're talking to the phone. They're checking this, checking that. They're actually often not even talking to people. They're checking what's on Instagram, what's on, I don't like to mention the other one, but you know, what's on this, what's on that. And they're not talking to each other. So I think there is a danger that the technological communication is actually breaking down personal interaction, in that it's about the collective and the communal. So the communal is where smaller groups of people come together. One of my mum's earliest memories, she was born in 1936. The Blitz started in the autumn of 1940. So she was 4. And remembered going into the air raid shelter in her yard of back-to-backs. And the older people singing songs as the bombs were dropping to try and keep their morale up. And my mum's song was, "I'm a poor little lamb that's lost its way." If you look at the Pathé footage for people underground in London during the bombs, we went to the underground, singing songs, people coming together, talking, sharing, boosting each other. So I think that's a massive difference today. I think we can still see it in parts of the world. We see it in Palestine, where people are facing horrific problems, and yet they've gone back in their droves. They've gone back to the north of Gaza, which has been almost obliterated. Why? Because it's their land. It's their land, and it's that bond. We're not just with your heart, it's with your spirit, your soul. And I think it's still there in much of the world where perhaps technology hasn't completely taken over. So I am hopeful. I would hope that people will learn that, not lose the need for individuals to come together in families, extended families, neighborhoods, and learn to work together collectively and communally.
Well, I would say the high street itself, the road, the footpath, it hasn't changed that much. What has changed is the types of shops and things. In fact, it's probably true to say, apart from half a dozen or so, there aren't any shops now. Going back into the 60s, 70s, then Harborne was a thriving shopping centre.
It was.
Every building, every shop was a proper shop. There'd be butchers, there'd be vegetables. You could go and do your weekly shop in Harborne, and you could get anything that you wanted in Harborne. Yeah. Today, if you want to go into Harborne, you've got quite a large choice of places where you can go and have a coffee. There's a number of places where you can go and get your hair cut. And so you've got your charity shops, and I'm all in favour of charity shops.
I believe there's still like 2 or 3 still there.
In charity shops in Harborne, I'm a great believer in charity shops. Some of my best clothes have come from charity shops, I can tell you. I used to have banks; they've all gone, and then you've got your estate agents. So the change in Harborne is really, it's gone from a thriving shopping centre to what you see today, and there's hardly worth going into Harborne unless you want a coffee, which is a shame. I have a mobile phone which was bought for me. I would not have bought it myself because I have no use for it. I have use for a little Nokia phone maybe where I can make phone calls. I have it in the car because if anything goes wrong with the car, I can phone the RAC or the AA, because there may be times when I need to phone someone, when I need to speak to someone or that, or I need to send a text. But all this, this isn't a phone, this is a computer. And I don't need a computer, so to go back to your original question, how has it affected us? Well, it hasn't really affected us much because we don't need it, so we don't have it, so we don't bother with it.
I don't know what's around the corner. We have to think quickly on our feet. But I think pubs are still going to be the heart of the community going forward, and I believe that won't ever change. It is tough for pubs at the moment, but I think technology will help that. I don't think we'll ever be in a society where pubs don't exist.